Hi everyone, Dr. Nicole Lepera, the holistic psychologist here. So today's video is going to be on a very important topic, which is attachment. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about attachment and how attachments develop and how we carry then those patterns of relating and interacting in relationship with others into our adulthood. And then I'm going to overview the 4 big different types of attachment styles. We as humans are all wired to connect first and foremost with our earliest caregivers. So thinking about it logically, we need our caregivers. Our caregivers, when we're very young infants, help meet our physical needs. They feed us, they change us. We quite literally need them to physically survive. We also need them to help us to emotionally regulate ourselves because, again, as little baby infants, we can't do that on our own. So each and every one of you listening has come to this planet with that wiring. We need to connect, and we look to do so. What happens is we engage in relationships with these caregivers, and again, the caregiving environments that each and every one of us were born into look different for each of us, but whomever's it was that were our primary caregivers, we learn to connect and we experience connections with those humans in those relationships. And then we replicate. That's our model for our relationship. So what do we learn from those early humans? We learn how to interact. We learn how emotions exist in relationships, and we learn how to communicate in relationships. We learn how to cope with environments. Again, a big function of our early caregivers is helping us to navigate the world and navigate our environments. We can't do that on our own. We also learn how to recover from stress in particular. I call that ability to recover from stress, I call emotional resilience. So all these 3 major functions are modeled to us and experienced by us in our earliest of relationships. And then, like I said, they carry effects in our adult relationships over time. So I want to overview the 4 major attachment styles. So the first one is what we call secure. I kind of am dubbing this the autonomous adult. This is essentially, through our healing journeys, what each of us are striving for. So what that looks like in childhood is it looks like having a caregiver or caregivers that were able to tolerate their own stress, were able to tolerate stress in the relationship between caregiver and infant, and were able to remain attuned at more or less all times to their child and oftentimes what is their child's differing emotional needs in each and every moment. Those of us who have experienced that secure attachment in our very young early relationships, in adulthood, we become the adult who can spend time alone, who can navigate our emotions on our own, and also can communicate and can relate to emotions and emotional experiences of others in relationship. So the perfect example of this is, in childhood, if you had a caregiver that was regulated enough that when you were in distress, they showed up for your distress and helped you come up with the ways that worked for you as the unique individual that you are to tolerate whatever stress it was, the sadness, the anger. Fast forwarding in time, then you become the adult who has their own emotional states in the relationships that they're in, can tolerate their own emotions. And of course, if and when they want to bring those emotions to the relationship table, if you will, they have the language and they know how to communicate. They also are able to give that space to their partners, friends, or whomever it is. They can allow other humans to navigate their emotions on their own. Moving into the next type of attachment style is what we call insecure or avoidant. So in childhood, what that looks like is having a caregiver that is disconnected, and of course this lays on a spectrum with how disconnected, but more or less disconnected from physical and emotional connection. This leaves then the child to navigate their emotions on their own. Having that pattern or that modeling in childhood is carried into our adulthood and looks like for that now human, that adult human, it looks like them having a disconnect often between their own emotional world, so how they're feeling inside, and essentially what they're doing or how they're relating to others outside. This is also then the adult who becomes or who is a little less sensitive to the social or the emotional cues of any other, of their colleague, of their friend, and definitely then of their intimate partner. So in terms of examples of this one, I am a very living, breathing example of this type of attachment style. I had a mother who was very emotionally disconnected, again, living out her own modeling and her own attachment styles from childhood, but that left me very alone to navigate very, very big feelings on my own. So not only was my mom wasn't really a handsy, kind of physically loving caregiver. I mean, I got my needs met, of course, I survived, but, I wasn't, kind of all of my physical needs weren't, she wasn't super fully attuned, put it that way. In terms of emotional needs, she was really on the other end of the spectrum in terms of disconnect, meaning not really available to me to help me, not attuned to my emotional needs, and therefore not really able to help me navigate my emotions on my own. So fast forward in time, I now became the adult who really struggled within my own emotional needs. I could have, to illustrate this point, a disconnect between my inner emotions and my outer. I could have a whole lot of things happening internally. Externally, you might not know. Or if you are aware that something's going on with me externally, you're not experiencing me as kind of seeking or looking for reassurance or looking for support. Because again, I'm replicating that model. I didn't have that. I didn't have someone showing up for me in childhood helping me with my emotions. And truth be told, and this might sound surprising to some of you guys listening because I'm in the field of emotions, if you will, I had a hard time, especially, I could do this in work. I was very attuned to others and their emotional experience in my job. But when it came to in my relationships, I had a really hard time being fully attuned and attentive to, say, even my partner's emotional world. Again, because I wasn't aware and navigating my own emotional world. So I'm a prime example of this type of attachment style. The next one is what we call insecure anxious. So in childhood, what that looks like is a misattunement between the child's needs and the caregiver's, where more often than not, the caregiver is responding to their needs first and foremost. So say for instance, because I know this could sound a little complicated, mom is in a bad mood, right? And child is looking for love. Instead of responding to the child's attempt at love, mom is going to be responding to her bad mood first and do whatever mom does when she is in a bad mood. So that's what that means in terms of the misattunement to the child's needs, with the caregiver putting caregiver's needs first. Oftentimes that then looks like unpredictability or inconsistency, because think about it logically. Caregiver is responding to the natural flow of the caregiver's emotions. So on good days, to really simplify it, caregiver is there and maybe attentive and attuned. So they are showing up sometimes. Days where the caregiver is not in a good emotional place, that might be the days where there's that more unpredictability or inconsistency. So in adulthood, that looks like a tendency to override one's own emotional needs. This is what I hear or I think of, this kind of attachment style leads to the adult who's calling themselves the helper, the caregiver, where they very consistently with what they experience in childhood begin to put other people's needs and emotional needs in particular first. It's this kind of mindset that if you're okay, whoever you may be, I'm okay, because that's exactly what they experience in childhood. When mom was okay, we might have had a great relationship. This is why can be really confusing. So similar than in adulthood, I approach my relationships with trying to make sure everyone else is okay so that then I can feel okay myself. Oftentimes, of course, this is me doing a disservice to my own emotional needs, because there might be days where I'm not feeling okay and I cannot wait for someone else to be okay to allow me to then, kind of be able to tolerate whatever is going on. Final attachment style is what we call insecure disorganized. So in childhood, this oftentimes looks like a caregiver who is a combination of either neglectful, depressed, traumatized, or abusive. This can be, those kind of big T's of trauma that we often think about. The messaging here for the child is very confusing. It's contradictory in a sense, because it's not safe when the caregiver is in that abusive, or a lot of times substance abusive behaviors fall under this category. So on the one hand, there are many occasions, where if the caregiver is the abuser, in a sense, it's not safe for the child to be in relation with them. But because of the state of the child and their physical dependencies or emotional dependencies, it's also not safe for them to run away, to not be with a core caregiver. So very push-pull, kind of contradictory emotional experience for the child, who then becomes the adult that is still unable to distinguish between danger and safety in relationships in particular. They have a desire, just like we all do, to connect, but they have a really hard time differentiating whether or not that person or that relationship is actually a safe place to connect to, or if, similar to their past experiences, it might not be as safe as it appears on the surface. This also translates to an overarching inability for that adult to regulate their own emotional state. Oftentimes they're feeling very contradictory and therefore very confusing emotions. So I hope you guys listening found help in this video, able to understand why we talk about attachment styles and how those earliest relationships with our caregivers really do affect us and really do become those patterns that we replicate. And this is across relationships. We might see ourselves engaging in that patterning in our work relationships, in our friendships, and definitely, probably, those of us who are in romantic relationships in those as well. It is also helpful, I hope, for you guys to be able to give some thought into which of these categories you might fall into, and then begin to explore for yourself how they might be affecting you into your adult relationships. So I know I didn't go into what to do next. I'm definitely going to continue to put out content on this topic, so stay tuned, and I will start to then explore how to begin to navigate and change these relational styles. Thank you so much for tuning in.